So, my name is Dory. I'm the program director for Passive House Maine. We are a nonprofit based in Freeport, and our mission is carbon reduction in the built environment. We do this with education and advocacy for high performance passive house building. We host trainings across the state. We also hold lectures, site walks, and webinars. And then we have an annual conference that's taking place in Freeport in February. It is a great educational opportunity for folks in the high performance building space and those of you who need CEUs, perhaps. Erin is going to be leading us through this training today, so I'm going to jump it over to her. And please, if you have any questions, feel free to let us know.
Awesome. Thanks, Dory. Yeah, just to reiterate, if you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. I also don't mind being interrupted if you have something that you want to know urgently, if we're on a slide that is of particular interest. We're also joined by Randy Rand. He was a former training director for Passive House Maine. He currently owns and operates r.haus in Orono. It's focused on high performance building, everything from new construction to deep energy retrofits. I kind of call him my builder buddy in these sessions. He is the one who can answer very specific questions about assemblies, whereas I have been leading these trainings for nearly a year now, and my focus is more on the energy code content. So as we go, either Randy or I can answer questions. All right, so jumping in. Where Pass Maine is able to offer low cost trainings across the state due to the generous support of the Department of Energy Resources and the Clean Energy Partnership. We have additional funding from the Harold Alphen Foundation. We have a growing list of training initiatives. This one, for instance, is our co-training. We also just ran a pre-apprenticeship program where we had 8 members in our inaugural cohort. We are in the K through 12 realm right now, where we do career presentations on clean energy jobs. We also are going to be offering a 2-day high performance builder training. So if you're not already on our newsletter, please follow along so you can have those updates. So today we're here to discuss the 2021 IECC. On April 7th of this year, Maine switched from the 2015 IECC to 2021 IECC. When we talk about energy conservation between those two guides, we can see that there's a 10% increase in energy savings from 2015 to 2021, which doesn't sound like a lot, but we all have to put everything in perspective. So if we zoom out a little bit, we can see that's a 40% increase from 2006. So to put it in more perspective, why do we talk about energy conservation and why does it matter? I'm not going to go through this whole timeline, but it's important to note that energy conservation became important around the 1950s when people started defaulting on their mortgages because they couldn't also make their energy payment. There was also in the 1970s the oil embargo and a later oil crisis, which brought national attention to the energy crisis. This is when we had very long lines at gas stations, price of oil to heat your building skyrocketed. So people started thinking that there was a real need to conserve energy, and that's when our model energy codes start to take shape. So kind of bringing it back to more locally, why does energy conservation matter here in Maine? It's really this statistic here, the 60%. I'm so proud to live in Maine. I love our state. But if we look at the US average, Mainers are paying about 60% more for space and water heating. There are a couple things that go into that. One of it is that Maine has one of the oldest building stocks in the country. So if a lot of our buildings were built before codes, they're uninsulated or not insulated to a high standard. So a lot of energy is being wasted. There's a lot of work we can do to reduce energy consumption, and part of that work is following the new 2021 energy conservation codes. So our name is Passive House Maine, and I think it's important well, I'm not trying to sell anybody on being like a certified passive house builder or anything, but to kind of put it into perspective. There are already people in Maine, such as Randy and Builders Internet Network, who are building houses that use 90% less energy than a house built before the 1970s, and about 75% less energy than a home being built to the current 2021 standards. What that means financially is if on average Mainers are spending about $3,000 a year on energy, there are builders in Maine who are already achieving about a $300 annual energy cost. And if we look at just kind of how the passive house model compares to the 2021 IECC, we can see that they're actually starting to overlap a little bit, especially when we look at the roof insulation. It's R60 in the 2021 IECC, and it's pretty close to that in the passive house model. One key difference is the air tightness. Passive house focuses on airtight construction, and the passive house model has a zero point 0.6 air changes per hour, whereas the air tightness requirement in 2021 is 3 air changes per hour. Honestly, though, when we bring in our performance builders to talk with us during our in-person code trainings, it's not so different. It's really just attention to detail and attention to transitions, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. And cost always comes up. You know, how much more does it cost to build a 2021 IECC compared to the 2015? I don't have that data in front of me today, but I can say that if we're building from the 2021 IECC and going all the way passive, it's about a 10% premium, like on a new construction. Um, that percentage actually gets much less if we're talking about multifamily or bigger builds, and it's about a 2.4% premium to go from 2021 IECC to fully passive in a large multifamily project. We also bring in high performance builders to chat with us about code because we already know the trajectory of codes in the US. This is a graph from the Department of Energy, and it's telling us that here we are, and I can't actually see what it is. That might be 2021, but in 2024, we're already going to have this reduction in energy. And we can see by the in the far right corner of the graph, by 2030, the goal is a zero energy building. So we're here today to talk about meeting Maine's energy code in climate zone 6 and 7. Most of the Maine is in climate zone 6, and then the county is up there in climate zone 7. The climate zones become important because as we get into code, it starts referencing climate zones. So we have a bunch of objectives to cover today. This feels like a test for me. We have been reducing the hours spent on this very presentation from an all-day code training. Then we launched a 3-hour code training, and now I'm going to try to get through as much as I can in an hour. So it's kind of a fun time for me right now. All right, so let's jump in. What is MUBEC? MUBEC is the Maine United Building and Energy Codes. MUBEC adopts our IECC base codes, which includes the 2021 IECC, which is the Energy Conservation Code, along with the IRC, which is a residential code, and other safety codes and mechanical codes. Not only do they adopt those base codes, but they also make Maine-specific revisions. So it's our ICC base codes plus our Maine-specific amendments that equal law. This is actually a sticking point for a lot of people in the understanding of who needs to build to code. And the answer is that everybody in Maine needs to build to the 2021 IECC standards. It's MUBEC is law everywhere in Maine. The only difference is that municipalities with 4,000 people or less, they don't need to hire a code enforcement officer to enforce the codes. So enforcement is always the elephant in the room, but everybody needs to build to the 2021 ICC base codes. So if you're in a municipality with 4,000 or less, why build a code when it's not enforced? Because MUBEC is law. If you're not building to these standards, you're violating the law. And really, non-compliance becomes an issue with resale. So down the road, you'll see the problems when the property changes hands. So we now know that MUBEC adopts our base codes and then they make Maine specific amendments. So where do we find these things? The ICC base codes can be accessed for free on the ICC website. I have a QR code here for you. And the Maine specific amendments can be found currently on the Maine State Fire Marshal's website. I believe that is changing soon. Randy, do you remember the name of the website that it's going to be moved to?
I don't know exactly where they'll have it within the website, but I'm sure they'll keep both a link active at the Maine State Fire Marshal's site and redirect people as they begin to look to. So,
So just to kind of reiterate this, on your left here is your 2021 IECC codebook, which can be available on an online PDF format. But just for a visual, it's here on the left. It's the IECC base codes plus the Maine specific amendments, which can be found on the State Fire Marshal's website. And you download Chapter 6, which is the IECC International Energy Conservation Code, as a PDF. And you'd cross-reference that PDF with your IECC book. So when we're in person, we like to hold up our code book, which is about 302 pages, and it can feel like a daunting task to understand what the IECC is and how to read it. But when we break it down to the residential provisions, there's only actually 24 pages that this entire presentation is based on. The rest of that book is commercial. A large portion of the residential provisions are just going over the climate zones, and it lists of every county in the US by name. So that takes up about 33 pages. And the actual code that you have to follow is only 24 pages. But as we dive in, we'll see that within that 24 pages, you pick your compliance pathway, and that breaks down the amount that you have to look at even further. So when we're talking about residential energy codes, we have to understand, I'm a builder, what applies to me in the residential scope. Essentially, buildings 3 stories or less in height fall under the residential IECC, and that can be detached single-family homes, row houses, or 3-story multifamily houses. I think it's important to note that as long as your building is 3 stories or less, and maybe it's mixed use, it has a couple levels of apartments or one level of retail. The apartments in that 3-story dwelling would fall under the residential, the retail would fall under commercial. But if you bump that same structure up to 4 stories and you had 3 stories of apartments and 1 story of retail, that would all fall under, including the apartments, the commercial provisions of the IECC. So we're talking, I feel like I always talk about this stuff in the context of new construction, but there are guidelines for existing buildings that include what to do and how to follow for alterations, repairs, additions, and change of occupancy. Largely, it's only the parts of the buildings that are changed that must comply with the 2021 IECC. To figure out what and how much needs to comply, there's a pretty simple chart that you can follow. You would decide what your scope of work is. Say you're changing your basement, which was previously an unconditioned space to a conditioned space. You would actually need to have that whole space meet the 2021 IECC. But saying you're doing an alteration, only the parts that you change need to be brought up to the current standard. Okay, now we're getting into kind of the meat of it. We know where to find what MUBEC adopts, where to find our resources, but now how do we comply with the code? There are essentially 3 compliance options outlined in the IECC, and then MUBEC also adopted compliance pathways, which are the DOE Zero Energy Homes, or PHEIS or Passive House Certification. So if you have any of those things, you can actually bypass reading through and following the specifications of the IECC. But if you are going to just work within the book itself, you have 3 options. You have the prescriptive compliance option, which is the option we're actually going to spend the most time on today because across the board, it's the option that most Maine builders pick. There's also a total building performance option and an energy rating index option. So before you even dive into the codes and what insulation values you have to meet, you sort of need to pick how you want to approach your build, like which compliance pathway do you want to pick. Once you know that, then you look at the sections that reference let's say the prescriptive compliance option. It will tell you which sections you need to meet, and then you can pretty much skip everything else. Um, so like I said, we're going to stick mostly with the prescriptive compliance option today because it is the one most widely used here in Maine. But before I move into the prescriptive compliance option, it's important to note that no matter which compliance pathway you choose, you also need to pick one additional energy efficiency measure, regardless of your compliance path. So these additional energy efficiency package options, I think, are listed in a section R.408. I have them here written out. Randy, do you know which package option would be maybe the easiest to meet or one that builders are saying that they're going to likely use?
Honestly, most of them, I think we wind up hitting and we're not realizing it. So, if you dig into any of them, I think the HVAC ones, reducing water heating, a lot of those are starting to be met just with efficiencies in standard equipment that people are meeting. So, I don't think any of these are really difficult things that are impossible to overcome or challenging to overcome.
And this is just a chart on what these energy package options are, what section you can find them under, and what the minimum requirements are. I will be sending out a PDF after the presentation where some of these resources will be included. So we don't have to go through it step by step, but I just want to bring awareness to it that you have to pick your compliance option. No matter which compliance option you pick, you have to add an energy package option. All right, so now we're getting into that first compliance pathway, the prescriptive compliance option, gets a little bit confusing because we have essentially three compliance pathways that we can choose. But the prescriptive compliance option, you actually have three different ways you can show compliance within that one pathway. So for the most part, builders in Maine are going to choose the minimum R value table pathway, right? They're going to be in prescriptive. They're going to look at the chart listed in R402, and they're going to meet those minimum R value requirements. Two other ways that we can show compliance within the prescriptive pathway are by meeting the maximum U factors listed in another table or meet the total UA alternative requirements, which is listed elsewhere in the code. So we're going to walk through these three ways to show compliance within the prescriptive option. The first being the most prominent or the most widely used is meeting the minimum R values listed in the table. I feel like this is the pathway that most builders choose. I do want to say upfront that this is the most restrictive pathway within the entire pathway compliance options because you actually have to just meet these requirements per assembly as they are. You have some options within it, like when you see wood frame walls, like you can choose how you want to meet those R values, but by and large, you just have to hit these R value numbers. I'm going to let Randy weigh in some of these, especially the wood frame R value options, but I do want to point out that on your screen, if you can see in the wood frame wall R value, this is when it becomes very important to cross-reference your IECC book or PDF with the Maine state amendments. Because if I opened up my IECC book and I looked at the wood frame wall R value chart, I would see that it would say 30 or 20 plus 5 or 13 plus 10 or 0 plus 20. Maine has amended those two middle options to be 20 plus 10 continuous installation or 13 plus 15 continuous installation. So you really have to pay attention to what our Maine is saying that is the actual installation values versus what your IECC is saying the minimum R values are. Randy, do you want to give like a builder's perspective on some of this R value table?
No, I'll highlight, yes, and I'll highlight, just a few of the changes. I don't know how many of us have been working based on 2015 versions, but this obviously shows the difference between what was the previous code that Maine was required to follow and the current code. As doing a lot of these trainings, we were seeing that people were still operating actually out of the 2009 editions and actually haven't even seen the 2015 update. So a lot of this stuff is still being fairly new for a lot of people and don't understand what a lot of uh, some of the symbols and stuff mean within this table. So just a couple changes that we're seeing that are being talked about a lot is now a requirement for an R60 in an attic. And we can see that in that ceiling R value column. And you can see the 2021 in our climate zone 6, we are now required to have an R60 in our attics. There are exceptions to that. And we can take a reduction on our ceilings if we have the complete R49 insulation out over the top plates. And things that will help make that possible are high-heeled trusses. So our trusses can get just a little bit higher. And if we can maintain that complete R49 out over the top of that wall, then we can take that reduction across the entire ceiling cavity. So a slight increase in cost, if any at all, in a truss package can help you not have to meet that R60 requirement. You can still remain in an R49 requirement. So that is one of the areas that we're hearing a lot of people talk about out there. There are exceptions to it, but yes, R60 is prescriptively prescribed. And if you read the asterisk note down below that table, you can take that reduction. So that's helpful. They're giving us uh, a couple different options there, so that's great. And they're actually signifying how important the insulation is out over the tops of those walls for the performance of the building. So by being able to take a pretty substantial reduction over the rest of the ceiling. Another confusing, I wouldn't say confusing, but just misunderstood piece of the code is when we get into the wood framed walls. Previously, our 2015 code only allowed us the two different options of walls, a 20 plus 5 and a 13 plus 10. And what is new to a lot of people is that plus symbol. They're not sure what plus 5 means or plus 10 means in that table. And what that is that's continuous insulation. So you can see from 2015 to 2021, they've added a note after those plus numbers that says CI, just to make it a little clearer. That stands for continuous insulation. So what we were required to build previous was an R20 cavity insulation plus 5 continuous insulation. And note, I'm saying continuous insulation, not exterior insulation. So your continuous insulation can happen anywhere within your wall assembly. It can be interior, it can be exterior, it can be in the middle of the wall. There are a lot of different options as long as you had a continuous insulation, right? And there's a lot of different building science around where you put it and that type of thing. So trying to understand that is pretty important. But in the 2021 code, they've actually given us more options. You can see that they've added an R30 only option. So you wouldn't need any continuous insulation if you filled a cavity to an R30. That is if you're using a fiberglass or something, you're talking now like framing with a 2x8. If you're using spray foam, advantages, disadvantages to that, we can talk about that in a longer class, but you can get away with that in a 5.5 inch wall. Um, So that's what you would be doing with just the 30 number. But the code's giving us more options. It's saying, oh, we can also do an R20 cavity plus an R10 continuous. That's for a 2x6 wall with a cavity insulation and continuous insulation on the outside. When we talk about, or continuous insulation in the wall, the most common practice has been um, rigid foam board on the outside, or some other options like wood fiber or rock wool comfort board on the outside of walls. There's drastic differences between those types of products that you should probably understand before you start doing continuous insulation. Um, Both a rock wool or timber HP timber board products are considered vapor open, and they help prevent rot and trapping moisture within a wall cavity, whereas rigid foam will prevent the drying potential of your wall. So you want to be careful with what type of wall assembly you choose to do, and just understand its downfalls either way, and be able to better detail your wall based on what your choices are. So be careful with our continuous insulation options. That's what we're really trying to um, have understanding on. Sorry, I got interrupted here for a minute. Um, Trying to uh, protect our walls the best and provide the best thermal performance of our wall. The idea of continuous insulation is trying to reduce the thermal bridging in our wall. So if you think of your wall and all the studs in it, you know, those studs are only an R3 or so, whereas the insulation's an R20. If you collapse all those studs in a wall down in one area, it makes up about 25% of your wall. So for 25% of your wall, you're only an R3, and the rest of it is at whatever you can get in the cavity. When you add continuous insulation, it exponentially improves the performance of that entire wall, and we reduce that thermal bridging. So you can see the 20 plus 10 is the idea for a 2x6 wall. If you want to do a 2x4 wall, it would be an R13 cavity and add an R15 continuous on the outside. And then you also have the option to do just continuous insulation and do only an R20 if you did continuous insulation. So the code is giving us more options. It is making it a bit more restrictive by adding the Maine state amendments. There's some building science reason behind one of them. The other one, I'm not so sure why we increased it, but it has been increased. And so those are our 2021 options for wood framed walls. Is you can do all cavity at an R30. You can add continuous insulation and do it a 20 plus 10 in a 2x6. You can do a cavity of 13, add 15, or just do continuous insulation. So that's one of the biggest changes I think that has come out of 2021. Actually, even 2015 off of what people were doing. So previously, for the last 6 years, we still should have been building with continuous insulation prescriptively. Besides that, we have the change in the basement wall R values. Again, it's going from fewer options to more options. Now it's giving us more flexibility. It's saying we can do an R15 continuous, that can be interior, exterior. Or if you stud frame a wall, you got to be in R19. If you stud for that would assume like stud framing a 2x6 wall inside. If you're going to stud frame a 2x4 wall, you would need to put in R5 continuous insulation in addition to the stud frame. Understanding those layers, again, in a longer class, we would get more into the building science behind the dangers of where we place that continuous insulation and how that wall works to prevent, potential moisture issues within a wall. The other thing is below slab. Again, we're just getting more options or more potential for crawl space and R value options. So though the major change is the R60 and the wood framed walls are the biggest changes that have come and that will probably cause the most complications for builders to start to grasp.
Awesome. Thanks, Randy.
Sure.
I had pulled this over from our high performance builder training just to show that he'll trust. All right, so we're still within the prescriptive compliance pathway, but this would be kind of that second way that you can show compliance within the prescriptive option. And you would use the maximum assembly U factors. It's similar to the R value table. For the most part. What gets interesting is when you start using U factors, you have a little bit more flexibility built in. When you're using the R value table, you're only getting credit for the R value of that insulation. But when you start to get into U factors, it's actually going to take into account your stud spacing. You're going to get credit for your sheathing. You're going to get credit for your interior and exterior air barriers. So it's taking more of your assembly into account. When you use U factors. But what both the R value and the U factor table are getting at is that the IECC wants to be sure that it's understood that your building, your project needs to have a very well-defined thermal envelope. So when you are doing what we call the red pencil test, you need to take a section of your building and be able to go around that entire building and define your thermal envelope without picking up your pencil. So in this case, it could look something like this. We're moving around the building. We know exactly what our R values are, and in every component, what they need to be. And we have to make sure that it goes all the way around our building in one continuous attempt. The third way to show compliance within that prescriptive pathway is by meeting that total UA alternative. This is where it actually starts getting much more flexible. The total UA is the sum of the U factors. So you take the U factors of your assembly and you times that by your assembly area. This can be calculated by a spreadsheet or by hand. It could be, but it's mostly calculated with a free online software called ResCheck. This is where we start to see trade-offs. If it feels cumbersome to meet the R60 in the ceiling, or maybe the continuous insulation on a 2x6 stud wall, when you start using the total UA alternative, you can start getting credit. So if you boost insulation here, or you opt for better performing windows, you might be able to take a reduction elsewhere. And again, ResCheck is the simplest way to show compliance within this total UA alternative. Again, it adds for that trade-off flexibility. But not only that, when you use ResCheck, it gives you a comprehensive evaluation. It prints out a checklist for yourself. It prints out a checklist for your code enforcement officer. And it also prints out what's called a permanent energy certificate. So these are all requirements of the IECC, and this one software actually does it for you. It's very easy to use. You go in and you plug in your U factors and your assembly area, and it's going to spit out a report. It's going to tell you if you've met or exceeded code, and it's going to give you the percentage better than compliance. For anybody who might be building in Portland, South Portland, or Freeport, those municipalities have adopted the stretch code. And this is actually the tool you're going to use to show your percent better than code, because the stretch code requires that you are 15% better than code. Brandy, is there anything else you want to add about ResCheck other than flexibility and ease for code enforcement?
No, it is a free software, so it's not something you have to purchase. So I recommend that people always give it a try. Just download it or open it up and actually go through the exercise of trying it. It's a really simple piece of software to go, and a lot of municipalities are, even if they want you to go the compliance pathway, are actually asking builders to submit a res check calculation with their building permit. So don't be surprised, depending on your jurisdiction, that they say, hey, can you do this? It's not overly complicated. So it's just a good exercise maybe to try with a current project or your home, your current house that you live in, just one evening, give it a try and see how it goes.
So we're jumping out of prescriptive compliance pathway because we've covered the three options that you can use to show compliance within that method. The total building performance option is the second option listed by the IECC where you can show compliance. This compliance pathway is not widely used here in Maine. I don't know that's widely used in surrounding states. This compliance option is when you start to use very specific energy modeling equipment to demonstrate that your proposed building it uses less energy than a standard reference design. And in this pathway, it's only going to look at your mechanicals, so your heating, cooling, mechanical ventilation, and surface water heating to show your total building performance. Um, Again, not widely used here. If you have any questions on this particular pathway, I'd be happy to take questions at the end or via email. The last compliance pathway within the IECC is the energy rating index. Um, I like the idea behind this one. I think Randy has had his opinions when I've said that, because what the ERI does is it gives you essentially a score of your home and the performance of your home. Zero being kind of like the best, high performance, renewable energy, and 100 being the worst. So it's going to place your home energy scores somewhere on from 0 to 100. What I like about it is that it would give you an apples to apples comparison. Say we get to the point where like the majority of Maine homes are rated. You'd be able to, when you're purchasing a home or selling a home, say, hey, mine is performing this much better than the house next to me. I think it's an important direction because then we can start to have energy efficiency kind of built into home sales. And also, it's a consumer awareness thing, right? So we know the homes are the largest purchase we're all probably going to make in our lifetime, but we don't get to see that, quote unquote MPG on like a window sticker like we do at a car dealership. We can't say how much our energy bills are going to be each month. So I think this is a valuable tool. It's not used widely here in Maine, I think primarily because Maine might only have two or three third-party raters who can perform this work. So interesting concept, not used a ton here in Maine. So now this is just like an overview of our three compliance pathways, just kind of highlighting the flexibility. In prescriptive, it's very low. In the ARI, you have very high flexibility, meaning that you can take trade-offs. You increase insulation here, or you increase U factor components, or you can reduce insulation elsewhere. So depending on what you want to accomplish, there are ways to allow for trade-offs. In ERI, the Energy Rating Index, on-site renewables start to get credit for those. You can also see something like, is modeling required, right? Like if you don't have the tools to do an energy modeling or you don't have the software, you would probably go with the prescriptive pathway. Now we're getting into the ventilation part of the IECC. MUBEC has adopted ASHRAE 62.2, the 2019 version. And this is lists our acceptable indoor air quality in our residential buildings, and it sets minimum requirements for mechanical ventilation. By code, all buildings in Maine must have some form of mechanical ventilation. When you get into climate zone 7, which if you're up in the county, it's already a requirement that you need to have a balanced ventilation system. So an ERV, energy recovery ventilation, or an HRV, heat recovery ventilation. So just to reiterate, all homes need some sort of mechanical ventilation, and in climate zone 7, it needs to be a balanced ventilation system. We can talk briefly about the differences. By and large, most people are installing exhaust only ventilation systems. This would look like a bath fan or a hood range that is continuously running, meaning it's on 24/7. The difference is if you have it in the bathroom, there's a boost mode that you can kick it on so it draws more air out of the house for those times where you're in the shower. So when we have exhaust only ventilation, what's happening is it's depressurizing our houses. So we're sucking air out through our range hood or our vent in the bathroom, and it's pulling air in from all of our unintended leaks in our assembly, typically around the sill plate. It's coming up over, cobwebs and rodent stuff and things that just not very, it's not fresh air. That's, we're just replacing air by sucking in through unintended leaks. When we talk about balanced ventilation, the key difference here is that it keeps indoor pressure stabilized, right? So we have a fresh air intake and it's being filtered, and we have the air inside of our house that is stale being exhausted to the outside. These systems, an ERV, a ducted ERV, or an HRV, is going to cross pass with the incoming air is going to cross pass with the outgoing air, and it's going to precondition it. So if we're in a main home in the winter, instead of just having an exhaust only bath fan with depressurizes the house and is going to bring in all the cold air from the outside, this system is going to precondition the air. So the air coming in is going to cross path and be preconditioned with the outgoing air. It's almost a 90%, 95% heat recovery. So the air you're bringing in is filtered, preconditioned, and the stale air is exhausted. Randy, I kind of went through that pretty fast. Is there something else you want to add to? Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, I think you covered it well. Just the idea of the two methods are one of the two methods is required by code. Continuously running exhaust only or balanced ventilation with an ERV, HRV.
Okay. So we have ducted systems, or a large part of the work being done in Maine is for retrofits, and we can do ductless ventilation systems, which do exactly the same thing as that ducted system I just referenced, but these ones work in pairs, and they just go through one wall, and then the other one would be placed strategically, so you have some cross ventilation. But both the ductless and the ducted recover the heat and precondition the air coming in. So when we talk about ventilation, there's another free online software called RedCalc. RedCalc will make like quick calculations on ventilation requirements, so you don't have to just kind of come up with what your needs are by yourself in a bubble. You can use this free online tool. It's quick and easy, just like ResCheck. All right, so we're going to get into building air leakage and testing. This is another big one that when we're in person and doing our all-day co-training classes, we actually bring in an energy auditor who runs a mock blower door test. Blower door tests are how we measure how leaky our homes or our buildings are. So typically, it'll depressurize the space, and they'll be able to do calculations and tell us what our air changes per hour are. So in 2021, IECC, um, the the air leakage rate is 3.0, so you can have 3.0 air changes per hour. Again, I just want to highlight that it's important to cross-reference your Maine specific amendments with your 2021 IECC book or PDF, because in the book, if you just read air leakage and testing, the first paragraph you see is going to say, shall not exceed 5.0 air changes per hour. This was massively confusing when the 2021 IECC came out because people were just stopping at that first paragraph. But a few paragraphs down, it says, except for in climate zones 3 through 6, it's 3 air changes per hour. So Maine went ahead and made sure that 5 is removed entirely and that 3 is inserted in its place. So why is air leakage important? So air leakage is responsible for up to as much as 40% of heat loss in a typical home. Air leaks can carry significant amounts of moisture through exterior walls, And air leaks are actually the leading cause of frozen pipes in cold climates. I think people tend to think it's a lack of insulation. It's actually that cold air moving over your pipes that are freezing them. But if we take a look at this point here that air leaks carry a significant amount of moisture through exterior walls, we can ask ourselves, well, how much moisture, and do we really need to be concerned about this? So in a typical Maine winter, you have an inside temperature of 70 degrees and maybe an outside temperature of 21 degrees. Our cavity insulation, what the R30 in there is doing such a great job at resisting that flow of heat that our sheathing is no longer being warmed up. If you think of pre-1970 homes, there was no or very little insulation, and we were spending money on essentially heating the entire assembly, including the exterior sheathing. But now that we have really good insulation products and we're insulating very well, the inside face of our sheathing, where it says 21 degrees, is not being heated. It's very cold. So as air moves through, warm, humid air from the inside moves through our assembly, it's cooling down and its capacity to hold that relative humidity, that sweet spot of 40 to 50% relative humidity, is reduced to the point of 100% condensation. So just moving through your assembly, it hits that inside face of your sheathing and results in constant wetting of that material. But if we want to talk about, well, how much water passes through, if we had a 1 inch by 1 inch hole in our drywall, for reference, all our light switches and outlets are bigger than 1 inch by 1 inch. In a typical Maine winter, about 30 quarts of water could pass through that 1 inch by 1 inch hole. That's why air tightness is extremely important when we talk about buildings and building durability. That is why in the passive model, the air changes are 0.6 air changes per hour because we want to stop that air from moving through our assembly. So if we had that continuous airtight layer and we're hitting passive house standards of 0.6, 98% less water travels through the assembly. It's only vapor diffusion that is getting through your assembly, which equals about a third quart of water compared to that 30 quarts of water with a 1 inch by 1 inch hole. So we know that our air changes are 3.0 air changes per hour allowable by code. And it's also written in the code that all projects must meet air sealing and insulation requirements listed in the table that I'm going to go through a little bit next. So this would be that table that I just referenced. We're not going to read word for word. We're actually coming close to time here, but I am going to call out just a few of these key things to drive home some points. So if we take that first component and general requirement that a continuous air barrier shall be installed in the building envelope, breaks or joints in the air barrier shall be sealed. Just like the thermal envelope, it needs to be continuous. You need to be able to take a section of your house or your building and draw a plan for your air barrier all the way around your assembly without picking up your pencil. It's gets a little bit challenging, but we can start reading deeper into the code and start kind of calling out these spaces that need to be air sealed or taped. So if this is a 2-bay stud wall assembly on a foundation, and I'm using my exterior sheathing, which would be CDX or better, as my air barrier, I'm going to make sure that I tape the base joint, the foundation to the sheathing. I'm going to make sure that the sheathing is going to be taped to the transition up over the top plate. I'm going to tape all seams in the plywood sheathing to continue to create that continuous air barrier around my assembly. This is just another shot of making that transition from the sheathing up over the top plate. It's something that has to be planned ahead of time. In this scenario, I'm envisioning that I'm ripping down a piece of zip and I'm using it as something that I can use as my air barrier on top of my top plates. And I'm going to leave a little bit extra than the width of my studs so that I can continue my air barrier on the inside under the top of my truss system. To show that in real time, this is one of Randy's builds up in Quebec. So on the left here, you can see that he was using a self-adhering WRB, weather-resistant barrier. He planned ahead and flipped a piece of that up over the exterior top plate and left just enough of a piece of it to then tape on the right side his air barrier that sits on the bottom of his trusses, so that he can create that continuity of his air barrier around his assembly. This all took pre-planning to make sure that he knew where his transition points were going to be and what materials he was going to use. He was going from a exterior self-adhesive WRB to an interior air barrier vapor barrier membrane. We can also say that we know and understand these common air leakage points. So if we were doing a blower door test, we can know the big problem areas. A lot of times it's your sill plate that hasn't been caulked and air sealed, or your rim joist. When I think about my own home, I have all these lights, 6-inch holes all throughout my ceiling. That's causing air leakage into my attic space. So here's just an example of these common points where we can physically feel air leakage if we're running a blower door test, or if it's just a windy day in some cases. So Mubeck and the ICC wants us to do the blower door test anytime after all penetrations of the building thermal envelope have been sealed. I think in our in-person classes, we like to make the argument that you should consider a pretest. Um, when you would do that is when all windows and doors are installed and most mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems have been installed, and the air barrier components are visible and accessible, accessible being the key word there, so that if someone was setting up a blower door test, you could walk around and it's a really great learning point where you can see where your air leakage is coming from and you can address it before your insulation is installed. In my own home, particularly before the blown-in cellulose, would have been a great time for me to do a blower door test, because then I could have gone in and I could have air sealed along where my top plates meet my drywall and any other penetrations through my ceiling.
I'll add something really quickly there,
Yeah.
mainly because a lot of people are utilizing the drywall as the air tightness layer.
Mhm.
One important thing, if you're relying on your drywall, you can't do your blower door test until after that point. So as soon as you can get that up and have a test done, do not insulate your attic, because that is mostly the majority of the spots where you'll find your additional air leaks. And it'll be way easier to help you meet that 3 air changes per hour if you have access to that attic space and if you're relying on your drywall as a air barrier.
Perfect. Thank you. And yeah, the why behind the pretest is allow us time to correct air sealing issues. Um, okay, I think here is actually a really good point to kind of stop. And Dory, I don't know if we've had any questions in the chat. Dory, you still there?
Yep, no, we haven't.
Okay, well, we have another 5 minutes. I'm more than happy to take questions at this point, or I can try to power through the remaining, what I call miscellaneous 2021 updates. Randy, you think we should just kind of blast through these real quick? Okay. So when we look at the key changes between the 2015 and the 2021 IECC, we have additional miscellaneous updates that don't fit into compliance pathways or air sealing. So some of them are listed here. Every building in Maine has to have a permanent energy certificate on site in a permanent location. I believe this was also part of 2015, but there are now more requirements. So this certificate would be printed out if you use ResCheck. So lighting controls is another update. All permanent light fixtures must use a dimmer or occupancy sensor or built-in control. There are exceptions to this. This is all just to conserve energy. This is a big one that we talk about kind of extensively in our trainings. It's access hatches and doors doors to unconditioned spaces need to be insulated to the R value as a surrounding area. So when I think about my home, I have an uninsulated hatch, and technically it should be insulated to at least R49, which would be the surrounding area. So if you are using your drywall as your air barrier, you now need air sealed electrical boxes. Um, this just makes your air barrier remain continuous because a regular electrical box is just allows air to pass freely through it. But if you had your air barrier in the exterior of your assembly or even the middle of your assembly, you don't need to have air sealed electrical boxes. Randy, do you want to talk about a mechanical system piping insulation?
Yeah, I can hit on it. I guess the main point here is be sure our trade partners are noting that there are requirements outside of their standard codes. Electricians follow the National Electrical Code, but the energy code and our building code actually has additional electrical requirements. The same thing with mechanical and plumbers, right? So there's more requirements on insulation for our plumbing systems, and particularly our hot water piping insulation, and any mechanical ducts or ventilation ducts that or sorry, heating ducts that we're running, have additional insulation requirements and where they can be located and where they can't be. So be sure that your trade partners are also, or make sure you're making your trade partners aware that there are additional requirements beyond their code that we do have to meet.
Wow, so we have like made it to the last slide. This is the last slide in presentation, and this is just going over again that if you have to not only check your IECC base codes, your Maine specific amendments, but you also have to know where you live and where your project is being built. If you are in one of three municipalities, Freeport, South Portland, or Portland, that accepted that accepted is not the right word.
Adopted.
Adopted, there we go. Thanks, Randy. Adopted the stretch code. There are additional requirements, and it's that you have to exceed the total UA alternative by at least 15% over a code compliant project. You can only really show compliance with this, I believe, by using ResCheck. So that tool, again, is handy and free. And then if you have a project that does not use fossil fuels, you just have to exceed that by 10%. I am going to give us all a pat on the back. We made through a ton of content in exactly an hour, so yay. Thanks, Randy, for joining us and giving a builder's perspective. I truly appreciate it. Dory, thank you for the introduction to the webinar. And thanks to everybody else for joining us for our conversation on meeting Maine's energy code.
I've just dropped a link in the chat as well. If you're interested in any of the full day trainings to really dive in and get more expansive on this, you can visit our website.
Perfect. Thanks, Dory.
Thanks all.